You may have heard of the chant revival that is taking place in the world of sacred music. Websites like the Chant Cafe are popping up on the web. Chant workshops are taking place in numerous parishes across the country, and people like me have at least one t-shirt with a piece of religious art on the front and chant notation on the back. Laugh-worthy nerdiness aside, these are all signs of an attempt to revive a lost tradition. This attempt has been made by a number of sacred musicians in response to the requests of the Second Vatican Council. Sacrosanctum Concilium, the Constitution on the Liturgy, put forth by Vatican II, says the following in paragraph 116. The Church acknowledges Gregorian chant as distinctive of the Roman liturgy. Therefore, other things being equal, it should be given pride of place in liturgical services. Written in 1963, this paragraph shows that the Church has never intended for chant to be a dead thing of the past. The Church intends for chant to live on in a privileged place in the liturgy. You may ask, what is special about chant? Why does it deserve this privilege, this pride of place, over other forms of music? To answer this question, we must understand what chant is. To understand that, we must go back into the history of the Church. In this segment, I will give a brief outline of the history of Gregorian chant. The first thing to know about the history of Gregorian chant is that there is much that we do not know. There is much that we cannot know, in fact, because for centuries, chant was transmitted orally, that is, only by mouth. The melodies were not written down. In the Western Church, for the first 2 centuries, liturgies were celebrated in Greek. After this, Latin, the language of everyday use, was used more and more in the liturgy of the West. In these first centuries, there were several different kinds of chant throughout Western Europe. Beneventan chant in southern Italy, Milanese or Ambrosian chant, which is still used in liturgy today, Hispanic and Gallican chant are certain examples of these different types. It is the Roman collection of chant, however, that was the foundation for what we know today as Gregorian chant. In the 5th and 6th centuries, as the great basilicas of Rome were built and as public worship developed, the Schola Cantorum of Rome appeared. This group of about 20 clergy provided music for Roman liturgical celebrations and developed the existing repertoire of chant. They revised chants that already existed and composed new chants for the liturgical celebrations resulting from the construction of new worship spaces. This Roman chant gained the title of Gregorian because Pope Gregory the Great is attributed with many of the reforms made to the Roman Rite during the 6th century, one of which allegedly is the final arrangement of the Roman collection of chant. One legend suggests that Gregory himself actually composed the melodies of this collection of chant. This could not be possible, however, due to the vast number of chants in existence, as well as the centuries-long time period over which research has shown these chants to be written. Nonetheless, Gregory the Great's contribution to the development of the Roman Rite is likely quite substantial, and this well may have included the arrangement of the chant belonging to the Roman Rite. It is only after Pope Gregory the Great, who died at the beginning of the 7th century, that manuscripts containing actual chants begin to appear. During the later half of the 8th century, a cross-fertilization of two kinds of chant occurred. During a visit of Pope Stephen II to Pepin the Short, the king of the Frankish realm, the king was exposed to the Roman liturgy, including its chants, which impressed him so much that he commanded that the Roman liturgy be adopted throughout the entire Frankish kingdom. As the Roman rite was adopted, and the Roman chant began to replace the Gallican chant, prevalent in the Frankish region until this point, there was an intermingling of the two kinds of chant, and the result was a modification of the Roman style. What survived was a hybrid of the two kinds, Frankish-Roman chant. This collection became what is now called Gregorian chant. It survived and took its place as the chant of the Roman Rite, largely because it began to be written down as a system of chant notation developed. It is from the 9th century that the first chant manuscripts of the Frankish and German Empire have appeared. The first notation we see in the earliest manuscripts simply indicated rhythm and expression. The pitches of the melody were transmitted by mouth. In the 9th century, oratorical or chironymic neumes developed. A neume is the basic element of notation in Gregorian chant. It indicates a note or a group of notes to be sung with a certain expression. These chironymic neumes imitated the rise and fall of the conductor's hand, but were written in a relatively straight line and did not indicate the intervals between pitches. Toward the year 1000, diastemic or heightened neumes appeared, which approximated the rise and fall of the melody and did indicate intervals between pitches. It is in the first half of the 11th century that Guido di Arezzo developed staff notation. This enabled the singing of Gregorian chant without commitment of the melodies to memory. The text and music of chants could now entirely be transmitted through written manuscripts. This allowed a wider diffusion of Gregorian chant. In the 13th century, square notation developed, which began to resemble the notation found in chant books published today. During the 16th century, after the Council of Trent, Gregorian chant went through an unfortunate reform. The humanists of the Renaissance systematically changed the melodies, applied the rules of classical Latin to the chant, and removed the long melismas. A melisma is a group of notes sung on one syllable of text. This left shortened versions of the original chants. It left the melodies as very simplified successions of square notes. When one considers the chant tradition, a purely oral tradition that had developed a unique character as the Frankish and Roman forms were blended together, it is not difficult to imagine how far the 16th century interpretation of these chants must have strayed from how the original compositions had sounded. The elimination of oral transmission, the development of the staff and square notation, and the improvements of the Renaissance humanists had undoubtedly altered the mystical essence of the chant of the Roman Rite. It was this state of things that prompted a restoration of Gregorian chant to begin at the Abbey of Celeb in the 19th century. In 1833, Dom Prosper Guéranger, a priest from the Diocese of Le Mans, France, was seeking to revive the monastic life of the Benedictine monastery at Celeb, which had been interrupted 40 years earlier by the French Revolution. Integral to this revival of monasticism was also a revival of the chant sung during the Mass and the Divine Office, the sacred liturgies around which Benedictine monastic life revolves. Because performance of the chant had suffered after the reforms of the 16th century, Dom Guéranger encouraged a more artful and more prayerful approach to the chant. He urged the monks to give the text primacy during performance so that the chant could reclaim its identity as sung prayer. For Guéranger, the text should be the reference point for phrasing, accentuation, and pronunciation of the chant so that the word would be at the heart of the music. Guéranger also began a restoration of the written melody. He sought the pure Gregorian melody wherever possible by making a cross-comparison of manuscripts from different regions. If someone honestly believes he has found the true Gregorian phrase in all its purity in a particular piece of chant, he said, it will be when examples of that same piece, from churches some distance apart, give the same reading. Using this method, the monks of Celeb worked to produce a substantial collection of restored Gregorian melodies. In 1883, the first books of chant for the Mass were published. In 1903, Pope Pius X declared the need for a restoration of chant to its proper form and use, and in 1908, the Abbey of Celeb published the Graduale Romanum, which contained the chants for the Mass, and in 1912 published the Antiphonale Romanum, which contained chants for the Divine Office. 50 years later, the Second Vatican Council called for a better critical edition of existing chant books. Celeb responded with a new Graduale Romanum, and in 1990 published the Gregorian Missal. Along with these books, the monks of Celeb, particularly a Dom André Moquereau, developed a philosophy of chant performance based on an understanding of Gregorian rhythm and the natural rise and fall of the Gregorian melody. This philosophy is widely referred to as the Celeb Method. This way of chanting can be witnessed at a number of monasteries in the United States. Two examples of this are the Abbey of Regina Laudis in Bethlehem, Connecticut, and Our Lady of Clear Creek Abbey in Tulsa, Oklahoma. An example of a lay-based organization that has made use of the Celeb Method is the Church Music Association of America. This organization has had great success in recent years in educating parish musicians throughout the country in Gregorian chant by use of the Celeb Method. Even though Celeb has made an incomparable contribution to the Church in the restoration of Gregorian chant to the faithful, it is impossible to expect that what we see today in square note form is an entirely accurate rendition of the chant sung in the first millennium of the Church. This brief history, if it has shown anything, has demonstrated that there is much that we do not know. Gregorian chant has had a very fluid existence, and once notated in written form, it underwent modifications and changes that have made attainment of it in its original form impossible. Nonetheless, the purpose of Gregorian chant is prayerful worship, and we can thank all those who have worked to preserve the treasury of Gregorian chant for the transmission of the Roman Catholic Church's sung prayer. In the next segment, I will speak of Gregorian chant as prayer and outline the ways in which its prayerful nature gives it pride of place in Roman Catholic worship.